We're glad to see you. And let me tell you that this is our 33rd webinar. We've been doing these for almost 3 years every month. You can find the recordings of the webinars on our website, and I'll put the link in there in the chat sometime soon here. Our next one, just a couple announcements about our next webinars. Our next webinar is going to be on September 17th, 8 p.m. Eastern time as usual, and we're going to have Bill Hartung, who's going to talk about the role of war corporations, how they're making their profits, of course, in Ukraine, Gaza, and elsewhere. So we've had Bill on before. He's extremely knowledgeable about the war corporations, and we're glad to have him again, September 17th. We'll put that link to that registration for that in the chat as well.
It's in the chat.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. And then October 10th, the following month, we're going to have David Swanson on again. We've had him before, and he's going to discuss the military base empire. The U.S. has, what, 800 or so military bases all around the world, and that's what he's going to talk about. So that's what I want to announce. And now I'm just going to dive in here and introduce our presenter, Todd Miller, who has been with us before. And very happy to have Todd again. Many of you may know his work on the Border Chronicle. He's the co-producer of the Border Chronicle. It's a weekly Substack report. It features news, analysis, interviews from the borderlands, and he does it with Melissa Del Bosque, who was going to be with us this evening, but she's got another important meeting that she's got to be part of, so Todd's going to take it on. Anyway, Todd's written for years about border and immigration issues. He's got books out, including The Border Patrol Nation, Empire of Borders, both great. His works also, he has also appeared in such places as New York Times, The Nation, Guernica, Common Dreams, lives in Tucson. And I'll put the link there for the Border Chronicle in the chat too. So Todd, I think that's as much intro as you need. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much, Ken. As always, so nice to be with you tonight. I have to say I need to come to your next couple webinars as well. With Bill Hartung, I tell you, I learned so much about Lockheed Martin from Bill. I used to work right alongside him when I was in New York City for a bit, and Lockheed Martin actually is one of those big companies that has got a bunch of contracts on the from Customs and Border Protection. So they're definitely in the border realm as well. And David Swanson too. I was actually on his podcast not too long ago. So yeah, it sounds like you got a good nice couple of speakers coming your way. So maybe I'll be joining in. But greetings. I'm here in Tucson, Arizona, where I live, and it is 5 p.m. here, some 3 hours behind you. That said, I have two little ones who will be getting home from school, and sometimes they will rush in and try to find their dad. So if you see two little kids, please don't fret. And yeah, we're here at about 100 degrees in Tucson. It's August, so we're still broiling in these parts of the world. But it's super great to be with you. I figure I'll start the talk tonight's talk discussing the election, and that I think that could lead us into discussion about the border industrial complex and what exactly is that? How is that a branch of the military industrial complex, and how big and important is it? How big and important is it that we know more about this border industrial complex and what it means, and why isn't it discussed by the press and the media? And when we're talking about border policy and border strategy and all the different things that we get from the media, but this idea that there are massive contracts and lots of profit to be made and companies that are influencing politicians and giving campaign contributions and lobbying in certain times of the year, like appropriations processes. Why isn't this part of the border known or talked about more? Well, let's start first with Kamala Harris. I mean, at first, when her candidacy was announced, what is it? It seems like now it's a long time ago, but I guess it was only 3 weeks ago. It hasn't been long. I think a lot has changed, right? In the kind of U.S. election landscape in the last month. But it wasn't. I mean, a lot of her stances and policies and what she was going to, her stances were not necessarily known on one hand, and then one might surmise that it would be she would follow along Joe Biden path on a number of different issues. I personally thought that would be the case with the border, but I wasn't sure. But since then, in the last couple of weeks, Harris has announced more vividly what she is thinking about for the border. And there's one particular thing that she has said that I think gives us a kind of portal into the border industrial complex. And so Harris has come out with 2 campaign ads that look at the border. In both ads, she talks about amping up enforcement, hiring more Border Patrol agents, bolstering the technology that's on the border, that sort of thing, amping up prosecutions as well. She underscores her role as a prosecutor in a quote unquote border state. Of course, she's a prosecutor in California, and that prosecutions will go up under a Harris administration on the border. And one thing that she has stressed in now several rallies and in one of her ads is that she was a staunch supporter of a border bill that was proposed in February. And I'm guessing that some of you might remember that border bill. It was touted and championed by the Biden administration as a bipartisan bill, and it was rejected by Trump first and then by the Republicans. And so, but this border bill, when you kind of look at it and dissect it and look at what it means or what it was in it, it has $15 billion going to Customs and Border Protection, CBP, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. In other words, it's a heavy-handed, enforcement-heavy border bill. It's a bill that the Democrats have since admitted is a Republican bill, a bill that pretty much is what Donald Trump might want. There's lots of money going for their border wall construction in that bill. There's money to increase Border Patrol agents. There's more money for technology. I'm talking surveillance technology, invasive surveillance technology. There's more money for DNA extraction of people in that border bill. DNA extraction. Melissa, my colleague at Border Chronicle, just wrote a piece last week about how Customs and Border Protection is swabbing saliva off of people that are being deported and getting their DNA samples. So that's become the newest part of the mass kind of biometric gathering of data that's been going on as far as border surveillance is concerned now for a long time. And so this border bill, it's adding this $15 billion on top of what is the budget, the already existing budget for Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's to say, Border and Immigration Enforcement. By the way, a child has arrived. I've gotten a gift. Thank you. Thank you. So we're talking about what Harris was saying in these campaign ads and the rallies is that she is advocating for the most money ever historically put towards border and immigration enforcement that we've ever seen. Because the $30.2 billion that already exists for the 2024 border and immigration enforcement budget is the highest ever. So you put 15 billion on top of that, you're talking 45 billion and a ton of money that's being funneled in to this immigration enforcement apparatus. So what was Donald Trump's response to this? In February, it was a rejection, but it was rejection only to respond by saying that Trump said that he would create a deportation force that would then round up and deport 15 to 20 million people. So again, Trump is basically, without giving an exact number as far as money is concerned, like with the border bill, he's saying that he will match Harris. He won't only match Harris. He'll be worse. He's going to be worse, right? And so what I wrote about this today, actually, in the Border Chronicle, and called it a border Cold War, right? Instead of, and it really does contrast the 2020 campaign of the Democrats, who were saying something else. I will say that whatever the campaign promises in 2020 weren't necessarily didn't necessarily happen in the 4 years that followed, but they were definitely not going to the rate of Trump, right? They were very much critiquing the border wall. Biden said, I will not construct not one more foot of border wall. Of course, that was not true, not a true statement at all. He said that we would not put kids in cages, also not true, unfortunately. But the rhetoric around the 2020 campaign was much different. And now you can see this sort of shift. And the shift is the strategy of the Democrats is to go to the right of Trump. And then Trump is responding by going to the right of the Democrats. So we're in this like Cold War, which is what it is going to amount to at the end is a lot of money, somehow, some way, being put into the border and immigration enforcement apparatus. So who's going to win this election in this sense? In this sense, I have to imagine the companies that are the primary contractors for border and immigration enforcement, who have been primary contractors over the years, the new companies that have been getting contracts lately, they're all kind of saying, yeah, this is great. We're whoever wins, it doesn't even matter who wins, we are going to do well. And so I want to back up a second and just kind of give a short history of how we arrived to this moment. Like, how did we even arrive to 2024 presidential elections, 2024 with CBP and ICE with $30.2 billion budget, being the largest ever in border and immigration enforcement history. Like, it's never been this high before. And I like to go back to give the kind of historic context, because this isn't coming out of the blue. There's been a strong participation of companies and getting contracts now for decades. But if you go back to the early 1990s and the Bill Clinton administration, the budget at that point for the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the INS, which ran border and immigration enforcement, was $1.5 billion. So went from $1.5 billion in 1994 to $30 billion this year, which is dramatic and really unprecedented growth of this border enforcement apparatus, which you might not know when you hear kind of the rhetoric, endless kind of repeated rhetoric of open borders that you hear primarily from the right, accusing the Democrats of that, which can be further from the truth. So in 1994, you have the Bill Clinton administration who says that who decides to up up the ante and do a really severe crackdown on border crossers. And they did a number of operations in a new strategy called prevention through deterrence. Prevention through deterrence strategy is a strategy that 30 years later we still have on the border. The whole idea of prevention through deterrence is to bolster up the enforcement in border cities. Like the first one was Operation Hold the Line in El Paso. And the whole idea was to put as many agents as possible on the borderline to stop people from crossing, bolster it with both a wall and technology, and then people would be forced to circumvent that area and go through more dangerous areas like the desert surrounding El Paso. Or in this case, the immigration routes would move to different places. So there are a number of different operations happened in the 1990s. The Operation Gatekeeper, Operation Safeguard, Operation Rio Grande Valley, all different parts of the border. And in each of those operations, lots of money was infused into border enforcement. Almost every single urban area was militarized. There was in 1994, there was 4,000 Border Patrol agents. By the end of the Bill Clinton administration, there was 10,000 Border Patrol agents. A lot of money was put into technology. You could see really there was border enforcement technology before then, including in the early 70s, there was a sensor system that was brought from the Vietnam War and placed along the California-Mexico border. But it really started to amp up in the 1990s with the Clinton administration and all this money that was going into border. And essentially the prevention through deterrence strategy was implemented by the end of the Clinton administration. And also with $1.5 billion, by the end of the Clinton administration in the year 2000, it was about $4.5 billion. So it nearly tripled the amount of money that was going into border and immigration. And it seemed like, oh my gosh, we've never seen this sort of growth ever. What is going on? The border is that there was a definite transformation, but little did anyone know that we hadn't seen anything yet, because 9/11 was about to happen. And with September 11th and the subsequent implementation of the Department of Homeland Security, which actually put stopping terrorists and weapons of mass destruction as the priority mission for Customs and Border Protection, which, while there were no quote unquote terrorists and quote unquote weapons of mass destruction crossing the border, opened the faucets for massive amounts of money to go into these newly created agencies under Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection, and ICE, right? And it was those years based on the foundation of prevention through deterrence through the Clinton administration, but with the money and the kind of counter-terror, people remember the early 2000s, right? How the drums were pounding and for counterterrorism, and just with all that money, that's when you can really see although it had started before then, the kind of bolstering of what I would call the border industrial complex, right? And the sort of conventions of private companies meeting in different places around the country with high brass of this newly formed Department of Homeland Security coming together and talking about contracts. Meanwhile, budgets were just kept going up and up and up and up and up. By the end of the Bush administration, which started at about $5 billion, the George W. Bush administration, I believe the budget was around 12 billion, 13 or 14 billion dollars. Significant amount of money, lots of money that went into big contracts to big companies. There was one in particular that should be mentioned. The Boeing Corporation got a nearly $2 billion contract to make to construct what they called at the time a virtual wall of technology using surveillance towers and a whole huge system. And that contract was part of what was in this SBI net, or the Secure Border Initiative. It was implemented in 2006. Also in 2006, again, using all this money that was coming with the post 9/11 era, was another initiative called the Secure Border Initiative. And if people are wondering when the wall was built, or if people thought that, I'm sure nobody here thought that the wall was just first built under Trump, right? Started well before then. And the Secure Border Initiative was nearly 700 miles of walls and barriers were constructed between the Bush and Obama administrations under this, also giving all kinds of contracts to construction companies and whatnot. And so you could see this sort of burgeoning kind of nexus between government, border forces, private companies, really starting in the post 9/11 era, and it just has increased since then. I have a number here that there's the website usaspending.gov, and you can track contracts that are given out by CBP and ICE. And since 2008, there's been 117,000 contracts given out by CBP and ICE, worth about $76 billion. And now, to give the context of the $76 billion, that figure of $76 billion since 2008 in contracts to private companies, that's about double the entire budgets from 1975 to 2003, 28 years leading up to the formation of DHS. $76 billion is double that amount, the amount of the total budget. So that might give you a perspective on how much and how dramatic the sort of focus on the border and immigration enforcement has been post 9/11, I would say, because I started in 1994, I would say even before that, we're seeing pretty dramatic increases. So 117,000 contracts, I think that amounts to like 30 or 40 a day. Or there's I don't have the figure in front of me. I did calculate how many days there was between 2008 and 2024 or 2023. I think I did it last year, and I think it amounted to about 30 contracts or 35 contracts per day given out by ICE and CBP to various companies. And if you take the amount of money that has been given to border and immigration enforcement since DHS was implemented in 2003, it's over $400 billion. So that gives you a kind of scope. Lots and lots and lots of focus has been put on this. So the kind of open borders rhetoric is almost laughable, right? Given once you have the knowledge of what the history is and how the budgets have, the compiling budgets, and how much money has actually been put into this, and how many private, all the private companies that have gotten contracts, it's really, compared to the past, it's astronomical. It's dramatically different. And so what exactly does this money mean? What does it translate into? What are these private contractors building? Well, the wall, like we discussed, the Secure Fence Act, surveillance. The Boeing Corporation actually had its contract canceled in 2011 because there's various reports as why, but that the towers weren't functioning properly. So the actual SBI net contract was canceled, but then the virtual wall idea was not canceled. What they did was make the contracts more piecemeal, and then started issuing contracts or separate things to different companies. And for example, in 2014, Elbit Systems, and this is where you can start seeing the continuing of Israeli companies that are getting contracts to deploy it's primarily surveillance infrastructure on the U.S.-Mexico border, getting contracts. In this case, Elbit Systems got a $135 million contract to construct 50 what they call integrated fixed towers in southern Arizona. They call them integrated fixed towers because the towers themselves communicate with each other. It's a technology that was developed first by Israeli deployment of such towers in the West Bank, in Palestine. And then they have a video out where when CBP put out its request for proposals saying that their towers have been proven in places where securing the world's most challenging borders for 10 plus years. So that kind of combat proven, combat tested, surveillance tested idea that you see from Israeli companies is definitely used on the border. And that's one of the reasons the Elbit Systems towers were sold to the United States government, Customs and Border Protection. And so that's just one example. There's also all kinds of drone systems. In the case of the drones used on the border, they're Predator Bs from the company General Atomics. Predator Bs, people here are probably familiar. They've been used in U.S. military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then the same company was able to sell them to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They're not weaponized, but they do surveillance. CBP has 10 such drones. They do flyovers on the southern border, but also on the northern border. By the way, you should consider the border not to be just the international boundary line. The border itself, in the legal definition, is an international boundary line 100 miles inland. So the border is actually a border zone. Customs and Border Protection can do drone operations, can put up checkpoints, can do roving patrols and pull over people for reasonable suspicion, also using profiling in these 100-mile zones. So if you can imagine the contour of the United States, every border, including the coasts, and imagine like 100 miles inland, that's the actual border, and that's where CBP and DHS can operate and deploy these technologies that I'm talking about right now, and deploy checkpoints and stop people and deploy all kinds of surveillance. While this is mostly concentrated where I live near Tucson and on the southern border, as this thing grows, as the budgets get higher and higher, the coastal areas are filling up. You can already see it coming up the coast of California. If you look at Florida, if you think of Florida is completely a border state. Because it's the coast and it goes 100 miles inland everywhere. It covers the entire state of Florida. It's what the ACLU calls the border zone. Is what the ACLU is called a constitution-free zone. Basically, because the extra constitutional powers that Border Patrol and CBP has in these areas to the Fourth Amendment, as one CBP official told me in their headquarters in Washington, we are quote unquote exempt from the Fourth Amendment and can thus, of course, the Fourth Amendment protects people from being searched or seized, right? And they can do searches and seize using reasonable suspicion alone. And that's at the discretion of the agent. So I just wanted to go out and tell you that, because when I'm talking about how all this money, where it's going to and where these different technologies and different products are being deployed, they can be deployed in these areas. And that's where they are being deployed, mainly again on the southern border, but also you can see it on the northern border. There's plenty of places on the northern border. I believe around on the Detroit River, on the Niagara River, there's surveillance towers and drones coming out of a North Dakota Border Patrol station. Also, Puerto Rico has a station in Aguadilla. They do drone overflights using what they call guardian drones, which are they're kind of developed for maritime surveillance, but they're predator bees developed for mainly for sorry, my tongue's twisted, for maritime surveillance. And CBP, like the drone surveillance, has been just the thing that it seems that they're going into more and more. They're also using more UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles. An example of a UGV is the robodogs, the robotic dogs that people probably have seen that police units use. So Customs and Border Protection has at least 2 of these robotic dogs, and that's from the company Ghost Robotics. Ghost Robotics, its slogan is robots that feel the world, right? But these robotic dogs, they can be weaponized. They have all kinds of surveillance capabilities. They can be equipped with these high-tech cameras. They can really be like robotic border patrol agents. I'm not sure how the robotic dogs are being used by the Border Patrol, but all I know is that they have them. Since they got them, I've been desperately as a reporter trying to figure it out, and they are not letting anyone know what's going on with these robotic dogs. The only thing I know is I have them, and it follows a trend of using drone technology, including unmanned aerial vehicles and now ground ones, and they're looking into boats, like unmanned boats as well. So those are some of the examples of the different things that are being deployed. Lots and lots of surveillance, lot more. Like if you go, as part of my reporting, I go to an annual expo every year. It's called the Border Security Expo. It's probably the prime place where you can really see the border industrial complex right before your eyes. High brass from Customs and Border, CBP and ICE go there. All the prime private companies go there, and they kind of peddle their wares and show what they have. And you go into this exhibition hall, and it's like going into a crystal ball of the future. You just see these towers and the robots crawling on the carpets and different biometric systems and anything you could possibly imagine that will be the future of the border. It's all there right before your eyes. And it's there where you just hear about like the different trends, or where exactly is the border going with all this money. You hear like the kind of lobbying that gets done by the different companies right before your eyes. Really, this year press was actually banned from going to the Border Security Expo. So I managed to get in because I adjunct at a college, and I got in as an academic. But it's distressing, right? On an election year, as budgets get higher and higher, that media is being banned from being able to report on these sorts of relationships. And one last thing I wanted to mention before we turn to more Q&A is that it's hard to say right now, but one of the really interesting things about talking about this in the heat of the election campaigns is that there's probably a lot of stuff going on around the border that we just don't know what it is yet. And the example I'll use is that after the 2020 elections, I did a report for the Transnational Institute. It's an Amsterdam-based nonprofit or NGO that really does a lot of in-depth research, primarily on a lot of different things, but on industrial complexes. And one of they've been focusing on border and immigration enforcement as one of their areas. And so I went as part of the report to look at the campaign, to look at at the top border companies. By the way, Lockheed Martin at the time was the top contractor. I think that's shifted since then. But some pretty major companies that people are probably very familiar with here. General Dynamics is also They're the primary. They manufacture what is known on the border as RVSS, which is the remote video surveillance systems, which is a type of surveillance camera. Northrop Grumman, they were contracted in doing what's called a HART system, HART. Again, such an Orwellian name, right? But it's Homeland Advanced Research Technology, HART. And that's basically this new advanced biometric system that CBP is going to use. That when you think of biometrics, you first think of fingerprints, right? But it's gone to digital fingerprints and now facial recognition and iris recognition. And this HART system has all of that. It has, and plus the DNA samples, plus where tattoos are located on your body, plus GPS coordinates of places where you have been in the world, right? So this whole HART system, this is being developed, I think, almost completed by Northrop Grumman. So you have pretty major military manufacturers and companies that have jumped into the border market. By the way, I should say the border market is one that has been in constant growth over the last couple decades. It's anticipated to reach nearly $1 trillion by 2031, according to market analysts. That's the total homeland security industry. That includes all the different stuff that I was talking about. They really think the sub markets of drones and biometrics, all of that is if you look at the charts of their analysis, it goes straight up. There's money to be made in all of those in those areas. And so when you in that report that I did, I looked at Biden and Trump in their presidential campaigns, and I was anticipating really a 50-50, right? It's probably 50-50. They probably, because usually, companies, we vote, right? We go and vote for one or the other or somebody else. And then, but the companies, they just vote for everyone, right? They just give money to everyone. So I figured in a way that, maybe it'll probably be around 50-50. That wouldn't surprise me. And it turned out that it was 3-1 in favor of Biden. Like the companies, the top border industry donated 3 times more to Biden than Trump. And then I looked at like the whole election. It was about 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans for other candidacies. But I thought it was very interesting that I've been wondering why, it's hard to say because companies obviously don't reveal why they're giving more money to one candidate than another. But it turns out now after 4 years, Joe Biden is the president that has by far exceeded any other president in giving out private contracts to companies. He is last year, he gave out nearly 9,000 contracts worth nearly $10 billion, which is by far as way more than Trump. He's already surpassed Trump by nearly $10 billion in giving out private contracts in his 4 years. And I mean, his term hasn't even ended yet. And so I don't know what the correlation there is, but you definitely have seen this super steep increase in companies getting contracts under Biden. And the sort of, and I don't know, like when you look at the border industrial complex, it's very bipartisan, right? It persists from one party to the other, from one candidate to the other. It doesn't matter. Like in 2016, I believe Trump got more those sorts of contributions from top border industry than Hillary Clinton. But I think it was more 50-50 because Hillary Clinton very well was gonna put money into the border as well. So I don't know. It's interesting to look at, but and I'm very, very curious when all is said and done in 2024, when the election is passed and you really can compile information and look. I'm very curious to see how the campaign contributions are distributed. Again, the lobbying, like I try to track lobbying also in that report. the sort of lobbying that's done, especially around budget and appropriations, and the same top border companies that are getting behind closed doors. That's surely happening. It happens every year. It's surely happening this year. But I anticipate that I've already talking to different people about doing such a report, but not after all is said and done, just to see how it's all getting distributed. And I imagine that Kamala Harris will be receiving her fair share from the border industry, as I imagine Trump will. But maybe they just think with Trump, he's just going to do it anyhow. I don't know. I don't know the reasoning behind it. It seems to me that each candidate will be spending a lot on it. That's what they're pretty much saying in their campaigns. But that Biden has surpassed every other president, and Harris seems to be following kind of in Biden's footsteps. I can just imagine that this will persist. But I'll leave it at that for now and see if anybody has any questions or comments.
That's great. Thanks, Todd. And we are going to go to Q&A, but before we do, Paul Shannon has a 5 to 10 minute talk he wants to have so he can encourage people to take part in this political action about nuclear weapons. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul for 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and have Q&A with Todd Miller.
Okay, well, thank you, Ken, and thank you, Todd. That was just so important and interesting. And I know we all want to get back to being able to ask questions and get new information. The companies that Todd mentions, of course, as we all know, are the same companies that are providing the weapons for Israel and just about every other place on earth through their weapon sales, Saudi Arabia, you name it. But of course, one area where lots of money is being spent in a very dangerous area, and that is concerning nuclear weapons. So I'm gonna challenge everyone on the call, especially those of you who are working with groups that are connected to one or more military contractors where you live. A number of you have been working on these companies for a long period of time. I'm going to offer you a chance for us all to work together, which we haven't been able to do in quite a while, to come together and want to raise one strong voice against nuclear weapons and the danger of nuclear war, and specifically focused on these same companies that are making these nuclear weapons. So what I'm going to do is mention that there are days of action coming up in September 16th to the 22nd. And these are days of action to expose the danger of nuclear war, but especially to go after the contractors and to shame them that are making these weapons of mass destruction, which will end human civilization a lot sooner than all these other incredible dangers that we face. So September 16th to 22nd, I'm going to see if I can put this up on the on share screen. Here we go. So this is the website for this project. It's a project of ICANN. These are international days of action, not just focused on the United States, where the world will say it's time to end this nuclear arms race, and it's time to remove this scourge from this shadow that hangs over our heads day in and day out, whether we're aware of it or not. So here's the website. I'll just show you. In addition to this week on nuclear weapons, you'll see there's another week following it on the fossil fuel companies, the next biggest threat to our existence. These companies have promised to increase their fossil fuel production, and come hell nor high water, they're going to do it. And so we're going to get after them on September 23rd to 29th. But I'm going to focus on September 16th to the 22nd. Look at this beautiful website that's put together here. This is the list of the companies on the left side here that are making nuclear weapons. These are the companies that will be the focus of this this special week of action, in which people from all around the world, and for us, for relevant to us, everyone in the United States who's working on these companies here. So I'm just going to mention a few things about this site. So here you have a very interesting little web page here. Here you can find the company, your favorite company making these weapons. You can click on it. My favorite, of course, is Raytheon. We click on it and look at here are all the facilities that Raytheon has around the country. You can see where Raytheon is in your backyard. If Raytheon isn't there, maybe maybe one of these other wonderful companies will be. So you could go to Honeywell. Todd has mentioned Honeywell on the border. So here they are around the United States. The headquarters is starred here. And so you can kind of check out where these companies are located. All of them are making nuclear weapons. It does not mean that they're making nuclear weapons in every single one of these facilities, but it just gives you a sense of their presence around the country. So let's get back to the front page here. I'm not going to take much longer. I wanted to show you that piece of it. This gives you all kinds of information about the types of actions that you can think about. So here are some action ideas. Engaging with employees. Here's some ideas on how to do that. Standouts, vigils, and demonstrations. Some ideas on how to pull these off. Treaty compliance units. Civil disobedience disruptions. These are actions that people might consider during this particular week of action. And then the new one here is virtual actions. This is where people obviously don't go outside and to the plant. However, there's all kinds of information available on what you can do to write to the CEOs of these companies, to conduct social media campaigns focused on them. So this might be something that some of you may be interested in if you don't feel comfortable or are not able to engage in these standouts and public actions. There's all kinds of, there's a wonderful media campaign somewhere on this site. There's, the divest and boycott section, obviously, how you can deal with this. This is a big issue, obviously, with the Gaza companies, the companies making the weapons for Gaza. Here's how you can deal with your colleges that are invested in these nuclear weapons companies. Here's about your synagogues and churches. Here's about hospitals. And here's about different towns, how you can get your town to divest its pension plans or other types of investments it has in these same nuclear weapons companies. This lovely list here on this website. Well, there's a lot more information here. There's information about what the nuclear weapons are that each of those companies that I showed you before here on, right here, it tells you what nuclear weapons they make. Another part of the website here shows you what financial institutions control these companies, because all of these military companies are controlled by investment companies. The vast majority of stock is held by BlackRock, by Morgan Guaranty Trust. All these financial companies that we're familiar with, they also own the military industrial complex. Well, they don't own it. They have everyone's stock. We all pile our stock in there through our pension plans and everything else, so that when the annual meeting comes up, they just go and they carry all this stock in and they decide what these companies will do, whether they will make nuclear weapons, whether they will lobby for contracts for border technology and all this type of thing. So all this information is now or soon will be available on this website. And what I'm hoping is that you will strongly consider getting involved in this week of action. And if you feel tonight that you're able to make some type of commitment, if you could put put that in the chat along with an email contact, that would be great. And because this is going to be an exciting week, and it gives us a chance to all work together on something and see if we can get some coverage for it and see if we can get the word out about the dangers of nuclear war and about the fact that nuclear war and preparing for it is very profitable for these companies. And that the fact that we are at the mercy of companies making these weapons who have such influence over our government, of course, in ways that Todd has mentioned. This is something we have to get ourselves, this is a mess we have to get ourselves out of. And the first way of doing that is to make people aware that companies are making these weapons of mass destruction because they make money on them. And they own, as we've seen in previous webinars, they own many of these think tanks. They own colleges and universities, engineering departments. They are vast sources of money for the Girl Scouts and everything. All these nonprofits out there get their money from these companies. It's time to change direction here. What I'm going to do is mention the next webinar. This will be a national webinar on this week of action. It'll be on September 4th. I'm going to put the link, if I can, in the chat.
Silas has the link in already, Paul.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Silas. So if you want to click on that, that would be great. It will take you to the information about this webinar on September 4th. We're not calling it a webinar. We're calling it an action hour. We're going to have Kathy Kelly kind of talk to us and give us her thoughts, which is always very important for us to hear what Kathy has to say on these important issues. But the focus of this is going to be to involve those who get on the action hour in the week of action by asking people to take on responsibility for some type of action against one of these companies that you think is most appropriate. So I'll just put the, well, I guess I won't. I guess I'll get out of this and turn this back to Ken so that we can get back to this important webinar this evening. So Todd, it's all yours again. Thanks very much. I apologize and appreciate the chance to talk about this action, but we really do want to make a big splash out of this. If anyone tonight is interested, as I said, in getting involved in this and participating in it, please put that in the chat, and so that we will be able to get back to you. So Ken, all set to go back.
All right, great, Paul. Thanks. And that was great. And what a great website too, right?
Amazing. It really
I
is.
know. No, so good. So good. So there's already somebody in the chat, Louise Coleman, that says she'll help with press release distribution.
Okay,
Paul.
Louise, that's great.
So we'll check the chat after we're finished the webinar. So, okay, good. Let's have Q&A with Todd. And as we do usually, we ask people to use the reaction button to raise your hand. And that'll give us a clue of who wants to ask a question. I see a couple of people up there already. I'm going to ask the first question, Paul, Todd, just because I've read your books and I know where some of your thinking has gone. And you didn't mention in your brief presentation how the empire of borders has come about, how the United States has in effect extended its border and trained people all over the world about border security, and how, you know, there's money in them hills too. Would you mention that and talk just a little bit about it, Todd?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. It's super important part of U.S. border strategy, I would say. Prevention through deterrence, what I mentioned that came out of the Clinton administration in 1994, is probably the first prong of U.S. border strategy. A quick second beyond that is the externalization of the border that you could see really accelerate from Washington post 9/11. And that means the extension of the U.S. border around the world, basically pushing out the border so that it It's almost like forming proxy borders in different areas. Well, the one example, of course, the prime example is Mexico. Mexico's southern border with Guatemala, that the United States has put considerable amount of money into, kind of help bolstering the Mexican immigration forces through an aid package. It was a counter narcotics aid package called the Merida Initiative, and which gave Mexico a couple $1 billion, and part of that went to Mexico fortifying its southern border with Guatemala, and that also included U.S. border forces, U.S. Border Patrol agents, CBP agents going to southern Mexico and training soldiers, immigration officials, and police in border enforcement, and the transfer of technologies, which included biometric kiosks. These biometric kiosks, which take data from people that is then transferred to CBP in the United States. So when they arrest somebody in southern Mexico and take their data, then the United States, through this cooperation, gets the data of the arrestees as well. And so you can see this sort of the sort of border externalization is not only happening in southern Mexico. Yeah, I wrote a book, as kind of alluded to, called Empire of Borders. In that book, I went all around the world. I also went to Guatemala, the Guatemala-Honduran border. I went to the Dominican, Haiti border. I went to the Philippines. In the Philippines, you think, what on earth is the U.S. border doing in the Philippines? Well, CBP gave the Filipino government $30 million to construct a command and control center that put up surveillance towers all over the 7,000 islands of the Philippines for sort of maritime border security. Jordan, again, DITRA, which is the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which is a part of the Department of Defense, gave Jordan $300 million that was then given in a contract to the Raytheon Corporation for Jordan to construct a surveillance border between Jordan and Syria and Jordan and Iraq. So these are examples of the U.S., how the U.S. border is extending to different places. I also went to Israel, primarily to see where a lot of the different companies in the global industry, the border industry, are coming from, and did some research there as part of the book. I went to Kenya, Nairobi. In Nairobi, there's a CBP attaché. The United States has worked in about 100 different countries to help bolster their borders in different ways. And again, the extension of the border, the pushing out of the U.S. border, is definitely a big part of the strategy.
Good, thanks a lot. Okay, so now we'll take questions from everyone. As I always remind people, if you have a comment, good, but please don't go on and on, just keep it brief. And please do have a question for Todd. Okay, so Michael, I guess it's Hoey, you're first.
So, Todd, I used to live in San Diego most of the time, and I used to drive over to El Paso and on that. And in the 90s, it seems like the border zone was like 100 kilometers, 62 miles. I know it's 100 miles now, but it seems to me like the Border Patrol used to be a secondary police force. And I'm not sure if that changed in 2003. And the other thing I'm curious, you were talking about the electronic fence that, like in Vietnam, they had that electronic fence that cost like $2 billion in the 60s, and another $1 billion a year to maintain. And I remember parts of rural San Diego County seeing that when they changed the fence, like in Jacumba. I used to go there quite a bit, and I used to walk into Mexico all the time, but then they put the electronic fence, and then they put a bigger fence. So part of my question is, getting back to what you're saying, how over the years the fence, they keep, what do you call it, giving new contracts to upgrade the fence. So that's my question is, what's the Border Patrol do now in relation to what they used to do? And how does the fence, at least the part that's not in Texas, the one that's around land border, how is that changing over the years, or how has it changed? I mean,
Yeah, I think I think it's called the McNamara line, right, from Vietnam. That kind of sensor technology. It's there's been in the I think it was the early 1970s where they brought that technology, and I think exactly as you put it, it was right around San Diego where they were implementing like that electronic fence. So for one, I know that also when you think back to like the kind of surveillance technology using tech, that's one of the first instances where you can see that sort of turn to the virtual wall that we see now. And that's basically, I mean, I would say that was probably almost the seed being planted of what was to come. In the 1970s, the budgets were much smaller, super small, actually. And I mean, one of the big differences was that the federal government didn't put a priority on the border and immigration enforcement so much in those years. I think you had border patrol existed, and they did definitely good things, but the sort of putting your money where your mouth is, it wasn't happening, and that didn't happen really in dramatic fashion until the prevention through deterrence with Clinton. And that's when you could see, I mean, it started with hiring more border patrol agents, and then, interestingly enough, they in the 1990s, there was to bring the border patrol agents away from the 100-mile, you know, the inland, and bring them to the border to stop people from crossing, and then reinforce it with technology. And it's basically been the same strategy ever since. So the border itself, you have the border wall in many urban areas, and then there's technology right on the border wall. So there's cameras. In fact, I think on the Nogales border, right near where I live, they're putting in a smart wall, which is basically they're putting in these the kind of technology you see on the wall in Israel, on the the kind of black cords that have a sensor system right on the wall itself, and that's happening on the Nogales wall at the very least, probably on the other walls as well. But also, what they've implemented is what they call a layered enforcement system. So the international boundary line is just one layer of many layers as far as deploying the technology. So you go about 10 miles inland, and you have IFTs, or integrated fixed towers. Now in southern Arizona, there's 50 of them. They form kind of a virtual wall, or a line, or a technological wall, and they're in communication with each other, but they're also in communication with the ground sensors. There's 12,000 at the very least ground sensors along the entire U.S.-Mexico border, and they're also in communication. They have all kinds of advanced like the most advanced camera systems, cameras that can see 10 miles away, ground sweeping radar that has a 13-mile radius. That 13-mile radius often goes right into Mexico, so they can do sort of detection of people in Mexico as well, crossing the border. And it's connected with the drone systems, the drone overflights, and it all like kind of funnels into these command and control centers, which are often now more and more on agents' telephones, right? So this kind of funneling surveillance feeds into telephones is a big thing. As far as the 100-mile zone is concerned, it so varies. I know that the 100-mile zone was a Supreme Court decision in the 1950s that designated the border area as 100 miles. But I also know that in different places, as the Border Patrol extends to in differently, right? I don't know. I'm not sure. Like it's interesting that in San Diego, you know, it was 62 miles or 100 kilometers. And then you go to Texas, and there's places where they're beyond the 100-mile zone. They're going 200 miles inland, and then there is Border Patrol making the case that they have more jurisdiction than the actual 100-mile zone. So who knows if that'll show up in court one day. So I don't know. I think it kind of is uneven exactly how Border Patrol is patrolling, depending on where they are. But the fact that they can extend Like in where I live in Arizona, they definitely are doing the 100 miles. I think the furthest checkpoint is about 100 miles away, and you see roving patrols 100 miles away from the border. Yes, so, but the main thing I would say that's changed is the budgets and the capabilities as far as personnel and technology and what they can cover.
Good. Okay, Christopher, you're next, please. Go ahead.
Thanks. Todd, it's you have some astounding things to say here. And I kind of want to try to see if I can get a perspective on how the explosion of resources you've described plays off against maybe the other responsibilities of managing a border, such as providing people to do immigration justice regarding asylum requests and stuff like that. How have the personnel and or financial commitments of that arena compared to what the explosion you've been talking about for the surveillance aspect?
A lot less. The focus has definitely been on. So I'm focusing on CBP and ICE, and that's the enforcement part of it. And then now, like asylum seekers. In fact, right now there's that asylum crackdown, so no one's getting asylum, right? But asylum seekers, if there wasn't this crackdown, they're so bogged down even to get their first hearing. I was just at a shelter, which will allow families actually to stay during their whole process. And they were saying that when there wasn't the asylum crackdown, it was at least 8 to 10 months just to get
a hearing.
A hearing, yeah. And then after that, it's like years before you'll see the judge. It depends, it's uneven, but there is a lot of talk about there not being enough people, enough judges, immigration judges, and the prioritization of enforcement and the kind of resource explosion in that sense that I was describing. That's definitely been the focus. That's where the money has gone, way more than which begs the question, like, do we need all this money for that, or could that money be better used in other places, or could it, right? Like one thing, do we have a quicker asylum process for people and a more just one at that? Yeah,
I will certainly look into your other publications on the expansive border sorts of stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
I see Kim Wilson with a hand up. Go ahead, Cam.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, so I wondered about the surveillance, whether it's 100% of the US-Mexico border, and if it is 100%, if there's surveillance on 100%, then how do the people get past it? And what happens if they get past it and they're detected? Do they catch all the people they detect?
They don't have, it's not 100%. They've essentially followed the deterrent strategy from the Clinton years. Amazingly enough, it's 30 years later, and that strategy is what is still followed. And that strategy meant bolstering the cities first, and then they've expanded from the cities, especially with the surveillance technology. So to which they'll put up towers. The towers will be high up on hills. The towers have all this kind of sophisticated technology and can detect a lot. But a lot of times they'll detect people and they'll say, oh, they'll be at this point like in 2 days, that sort of thing. And then what people will do is they go further out past the towers into places where there aren't any towers, which end up being pretty desolate areas. And that's the deterrence part of it, because those areas are so desolate, they're very dangerous, and you can never carry enough water. And that's why there's been at the very least 10,000 people who have died crossing the border since the 90s. which is probably 10,000 remains of people have been found. uh, yeah, so that's pretty much what happens. People just end up going into more further distant places and to avoid both the wall where Border Patrol is and the surveillance towers, and end up going into really places where they have to walk at least 3 or 4 or 5 days, sometimes through mountain ranges. People fall and break their ankles, or in places where they fall into cacti or get bit by a rattlesnake, or all those things have happened, or your feet get so blistered you can no longer fit your feet into a shoe. That happens all the time. They're so swollen. People cannot, they have to go barefoot with these blistered feet. The stories are remarkable, really, of what people are doing to go through the desert. And they don't really even remotely close to catching everyone. They catch probably a small percentage. The majority of people make it through, but everyone's injured in some way, or they have a health issue. It's designed to create health issues for people.
Thank you.
Welcome, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's horrendous. I've been down to the border a few times, and you haven't mentioned this, Todd, but there are some wonderful groups that you are actually involved with that take water out to the desert and try to take humanitarian aid to people. And I mean, there's just wonderful people trying to save people's lives out there. So thanks for that to everybody out there and yourself and your whole circle. There was a question. I see your hand, Paul. Let me ask, there was another person who had a question in the chat, and that is Jessica Mosley. I can read the question from the chat, Jessica, unless you would like to ask Todd yourself, if you're still with us. Are you there, Jessica? Raise your hand if you are. Maybe not. Let me read her question. So she asked a while back, about a half hour ago, or even more, she asked, so does this mean that all the bickering about the border between the Republicans and the Democrats is just a smokescreen for all the profiteering happening across the aisle? Or to put it another way, is the border being, in quotes, allowed to be permeable in order to increase the, quote, need for more border patrol and spending? Whatever you think, Todd.
Yeah, good questions. I mean, definitely to like the smokescreen, the idea that they're on complete opposite sides of this issue is false. And simply, you have like what they say and then the budgets. Like when Trump ended his term, it was about $24 billion, the CBP and ICE budget. This year is $30.2 billion. So Biden has raised the annual budgets for this more than it's ever been before, and much more than Trump. The like deportation, they was showing the deportations of under Biden has been about 4.5 million people. That's one. Trump was 1.5 million people. That's 3 million people more than Trump have been deported under Biden. So like I mean, I don't want to just totally say that there aren't any differences between the two parties. There are, especially rhetorically, and especially to what they say, even though right now it doesn't seem that the way that Democrats are campaigning, at least in the presidential election, it seems that they're very much very, very similar. And yes, and that's what but when it seems like two areas are very similar, when there seems like, I should say, on opposite ends, when they really actually have much more in common, then it does create a smokescreen. It creates a smokescreen for all this other stuff that's happening. That's for sure. I don't know if it's intentional. I would think maybe it is. How much do you see the media covering these companies that are getting contracts, or the companies that are giving campaign contributions to these candidates, or like the contracts? How much does the mainstream media ever cover the sort of contracts that are given to private companies from CBP and ICE? They almost never do. It's not covered, that whole aspect of it, the profiteering, but also the fact that these companies they influence the policy. They influence the fact that the budgets do rise every year. They're pushing for it when there's appropriations. They're in there like pushing for more money. They want more money, and they want the contracts for certain things because they can upgrade their technology and that sort of thing. So it is there. I mean, you have to like think of it in that way. And what there was another section to that question. Part of the question was
The smoke screen part, and Jessica says she's here right now. So Jessica, if you want to ask your question, raise your hand so we can identify you, and you can ask the second part of your question to Todd. Go in the reaction button and raise hand. See Cam Wilson raising it.
Hi.
Okay, so, okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Ken, that I think you've already covered it, and thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jessica.
Welcome.
Todd, there's funny little comment here from Michael Hoey. So Biden put the money where Trump's mouth is. That's pretty good.
yeah, that's a good one. Very clever.
So Paul, Shannon, please go ahead.
Yeah, Todd, I just want to take advantage of the fact that we have you captive for about 5 more minutes. Given the fact that the narrative about the border that is espoused by both parties and many other institutions in society has pretty much won the day in terms of the public forum. It seems that what we need is a counter narrative, and I'm not sure what that is. This is a question that it's very difficult to get a handle on, but I would like to pick your brain a little bit on what a different approach would be that we might be able to advance to start changing the direction that this discussion about immigration is going in.
Yeah, such a great question. I think that is precisely what we need to think. For some reason, it's so interesting that the border conversations, at least on the national, at least in the political realm or Washington, they just end up regurgitating the same stuff. They get so entrenched. The same sorts of quote unquote solutions are offered, the same ideas about it, and it's never like we're never like brought into another place to think about to really like let's address what this thing is. Like, can we talk about the term border security? Because the word security is thrown around a lot. Is there really security here? Like, let's unpack what it is. Let's unpack what the word security is. Does it really create security for people? From my vantage point in the borderlands, it does not, right? It certainly doesn't for people crossing the border. It's intentionally made to make things as dangerous as possible. And then you talk to people in the borderlands, they feel less secure as well because they're always being targeted by the border patrol. So where's the security part of it? And I think like an assessment, and then if we put the money and like what, if we're gonna really talk about security, where could this money go? Instead of like the $400 billion that's been spent for the CBP and ICE since 2003, could that have been spent in another way if we're just talking money, right? For the well-being and security of people and peoples, even in the United States or around the world. I mean, there's just so many ways. Well, my point is that the narrative gets pigeonholed in these regurgitated ways. And then you never think beyond it. And when you start thinking beyond it, there's just so many possibilities of what could be done. Climate change, right? When you think about climate and the kind of displacement that's going to happen, that's being predicted, right? From millions to billions, even by 2050, there's already, according to one organization, the United Nations, there are about 23.5 million people displaced due to climate change every year already. And we're looking at a situation if the climate continues, which all scientists says it will, unless something drastic changes, that there are going to be so many people displaced and unable to go back to where they were, and we're going to need to think about things differently or address that issue, which is an existential threat to people, right? And like, why on earth are we spending all this money for this farce? I'm going to call it a farce. I mean, of security, because who's this security for? When there's and not addressing the other really huge threats in the world appropriately. And so, I mean, I just think that there's so many ways you can go about it. I would, my thoughts are, it's time, it's hard to say defund the border, but you could, but I want to say defund the border, right? And take that money, or maybe just incrementally start to have the budgets go down. They go up every year, so why can't they go down, and then start using that money in different ways? That's one way to go about it, as an alternative. And look, like, I think we should have to think, what is this security for? Is this security, like, for when you say border security, is that it's not for really the people living in the borderlands, nor the people crossing? Is it security for a kind of global system that we have in place, a status quo that's unsustainable, a status quo where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, a status quo where all these corporations that we talk about keep profiteering while people, more and more people are struggling, and those are the people that are crossing the borders. Like, aren't there, like, can't we look at other things, to root reasons why people are crossing? Can't we look at economic systems? Can't we look at the North American Free Trade Agreement, for example, or the different, the different mechanisms out there that is making the world more and more unsustainable, and start addressing those? Because that could, if people think there are border issues, well, why not start going to what are the real root causes of why people are displaced to begin with, and working from that vantage point. I don't know, I'm just throwing out some ideas. There's so many more. I'm sure lots of people have ideas, but when they're stuck in certain narratives, you can't get out, and you're kind of trapped there. So it's good to keep, like, let the imagination roll around, and how we can do things differently, because I think there's plenty of ways to think about it.
Thanks.
That is a pretty excellent summation of sort of what people might do and how we might think about it differently. And I think it's a good place to quit. We're running pretty late here, been about an hour and a half. So Todd, do you have any last thing you'd like to share with the group before we call it quits for the evening?
Oh, just I really appreciate this time with you tonight. It's always, this is my second time talking with this group. It's so great to be with people who are so engaged, and I really love the fact that people who are concerned about war, and the war apparatus, are including the border within that, and thinking about the border, because it's definitely a branch of that bigger picture that you all are looking at. So I really appreciate that, and just thank you and gratitude.
Yeah, and back at you about the gratitude. Thanks for sharing all your knowledge and your time with us. And I put in the chat, everyone, the Border Chronicle link and the link to Todd's latest article, which just came out today, the Border Cold War. I subscribe to the Border Chronicle. I think you all should. They have a couple articles a week that come out, and they interview people, and Todd does it, and his partner Melissa Del Bosque does it. And it's really excellent to get in your email feed.
Yeah, go ahead and comment on that article, any article. Today's article, it's about some of the stuff we're talking about, and I'll definitely, we can keep our conversation going there. I'll definitely respond, and if anyone who didn't have a question, you can go there, and I'll if you have more questions, I can answer it there too. So.
That's great. Great, thanks, Todd. And so we'll be back September 17th with Bill Hartung. Thank you all for hanging in here with us for this time, and see you next time. Let's work for peace, everybody.